A Teenage Nightmares original. A Night at the Cabin. Hello, my name is Jacob, and this is the story of the most terrifying night of my life. A night so surreal that I still struggle to believe it happened. I'm an avid outdoorsman and love to go camping as it always brought me peace. Recently, a buddy of mine bought a cabin deep in the Kentucky Appalachian woods. He offered me the chance to spend a weekend there, completely alone. I eagerly accepted. I had nothing scheduled and I figured I could use a few days to myself. He sent me the location, and I packed up my old camper van for the trip. It was a 3-hour drive, but the promise of peace and solitude made it worth it. If only I had known the horrors that awaited me. After the long drive, I finally arrived, but the parking spot was about a mile away from the cabin. There were no road trails, only narrow walking paths winding through the dense forest. I grabbed my gear, took a deep breath, and started the hike, unaware that each step was taking me closer to a nightmare I'd never forget. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows through the dense trees. The forest had taken on an eerie, almost otherworldly atmosphere. Despite that, the hike was surprisingly peaceful, even invigorating. In hindsight, I wish I had turned back. The hike alone would have been enough for the break I needed. But the outdoorsman in me was determined to reach the cabin. I wanted to build a fire, feel the warmth, and disconnect from the noise of the world for a few days. After an hour of hiking, I finally spotted the cabin in the distance. It was small and nestled deep in the woods, almost as if it were part of the forest itself. I made my way up the overgrown path and pushed open the creaky front door. The air inside hit me like a cold gust, unnaturally chilly, even for an October night. A shiver crawled down my spine as I stepped inside, the darkness wrapping around me like a heavy blanket. I quickly set to work, starting a fire in the old stone hearth, and prepared my dinner, eager to bring some warmth and light into the room. But even as the flames flickered to life, the unease that had been simmering beneath the surface refused to fade. I lit a few candles, their flickering light casting soft shadows on the walls. I eventually settled in with a podcast I had downloaded onto my phone. It was a collection of camping stories, tales of people battling severe weather, wildlife encounters, and other unsettling outdoor mishaps. As the fire crackled and the wind howled outside, and the podcast got good, I couldn't help but feel a wave of relaxation wash over me. The warmth of the fire, the scent of wood smoke, and the distant howl of the wind created a sense of cozy isolation. For a brief moment, everything felt perfect, and I allowed myself to unwind, forgetting about the creeping unease from earlier. About an hour later, I heard footsteps outside the cabin. The door had a heavy, old-fashioned lever lock, one of those secure types that made it difficult to get in once it was latched. So I wasn't too worried. My first thought was that it was probably an animal, drawn in by the smell of my dinner. Still, I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I stood up, moving to the window to see if I could spot whatever it was, but the darkness outside was impenetrable. The stars and the moon provided the only light, casting pale beams that barely penetrated the thick trees surrounding the cabin. There was nothing, just the deep, endless black of the forest. I tried to brush it off and went back to listening to my podcast, hoping it would lull me to sleep. Eventually, I dozed off, the warmth of the fire and the steady rhythm of the wind outside making me feel safe, at least for a moment. But then, I was jolted awake by sharp knocks on the door. My heart slammed in my chest as the sound echoed through the stillness of the cabin. I checked the time, and it was now 3 a.m. The darkness outside felt even heavier now, more oppressive. I'd heard the stories about the Appalachian forests, the strange happenings, the things that wandered through the woods at night. I wasn't about to open that door. Not now. Not ever. Then, it began to speak. At first, I couldn't make sense of it, but then I heard the unmistakable voice of my father, my dead father, calling my name. It asked me to let it in, its tone so familiar, so convincing, that a cold wave of dread washed over me. I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened, and before I knew it, Tears were streaming down my face. I knew, deep in my soul, that whatever was outside that door was pure evil, a twisted mockery of the man I once knew. But I had been blessed enough to know God, and I knew better than to answer. I knew better than to speak to this thing. So, I held my breath, clenching my fists, and ignored it with every ounce of strength I had left, praying that it would go away. Then, suddenly, it stopped speaking. A cold silence filled the air, before it was broken by loud, devastating grunts, like I had angered it by refusing to acknowledge its presence. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could hear its breath, heavy and labored, just outside the cabin door. It knew I was inside, and I knew it was out there waiting for me. And then, it began to move. It ran around the cabin, fast and erratic, its footsteps pounding the ground with unnatural force. The dry leaves outside crunched under what sounded like hooves, scraping and scuffling around the walls. Whatever it wasn't human. It was something far worse. I could feel it circling, as if it were hunting me. And then, it happened. The latch began to move. My heart leapt into my throat as I scrambled toward the door, desperate to force it back down. It was a struggle, my hands slick with sweat, but eventually, the latch gave way, slamming shut with a final resounding click. I wasn't about to take any chances. I grabbed a small bottle of holy oil that I always kept with me for moments like this and poured some over the latch. As the oil dripped down, a heavy silence fell over the cabin, unnatural and suffocating. Then, an unholy chill seeped into the room, settling like a dark fog. I froze, my blood turning to ice as I saw it. I couldn't believe it. Right outside the window, standing impossibly still, was a creature that defied all reason. It had the torso of a man, but its lower body was that of a moose, massive and grotesque, with long, gnarled legs that seemed too long to be real. The creature was towering, easily the largest thing I had ever seen, its hulking form casting a shadow that swallowed the light. I couldn't make heads or tails of it, but I knew one thing. It was pure evil, and it was watching me. It came charging toward the window I was watching from, its massive form moving with terrifying speed. My heart skipped a beat, and for a split second, I feared it would crash through the walls, tearing the cabin apart. But instead, it stopped just short, pressing its face against the glass, its breath fogging up the pain in slow, rhythmic puffs. Then, it smiled. The expression was so grotesque, so impossibly wrong, that I immediately vomited on the floor. There was no mistaking it. I could feel, deep in my gut, that smile was a promise of horror. This thing wanted nothing more than to devour me, to tear me apart with those monstrous jaws. But there was something else. It couldn't come inside. Not without help. It had tried with the latch, but the oil had protected me, keeping the door sealed tight. I realized then that the latch was never the real threat. It was a distraction, a way to lower my guard, to get me outside where it could finish what it started. Now it was just watching me, waiting patiently, like a predator stalking its prey, biding its time for the perfect moment to strike. I forced myself to stay calm, clutching my mouth shut, muttering broken prayers under my breath. The minutes crawled by, each one heavier than the last, until the silence became suffocating. So still I could hear the faintest creak of the cabin settling. I dared to glance out the window, my eyes straining against the darkness, but the massive figure was gone, or at least it seemed to be. I was trapped in the cabin until sunrise. There was no way I'd survive the mile-long trek back to my van in the dark, gloomy forest, not with that thing lurking outside. Resigned to my fate, I settled by the fire, its flickering glow my only comfort, and tried to convince myself to relax. But every crackle of the wood felt like a whisper of doom, and the shadows seemed to stretch and shift, mocking my attempt at calm. Before I could even gather my thoughts, I saw it again, looming just outside the window. Only this time, its expression was twisted with fury. Its eyes blacker than the night itself, locked onto mine, seething with malice. In the icy chill, I could see its heavy, aggressive breaths clouding the glass, each exhale a visible reminder of its intent. There was no mistaking it now. It wanted me, and it wouldn't stop until it got me. Deep down, I knew I was a goner. I've always prided myself on my stocky build and brute strength, but in the face of this thing, I felt like a helpless child. It wasn't just its size. It was the sheer presence of it, the overwhelming power radiating from its form. One look was enough to tell me what it could do to me. The damage it would inflict was beyond imagination, a nightmare I couldn't begin to comprehend. I sat frozen, hoping, praying it would leave. But then the pounding started, heavy fists slamming against the glass, each strike rattling the window and my nerves. My heart sank, certain the glass would shatter at any moment, and it would come for me. But just as quickly as it began, it stopped. The thing let out a low growl before bolting around to the back of the cabin. Suddenly, the back door exploded inward, splinters flying as it tore through the frame. Its eyes locked onto mine, burning with primal rage. And then it let out a scream so piercing and guttural that I thought my eardrums would burst. I knew I had no choice. I had to make a break for the van. Without a second thought, I bolted for the front door, fumbling with the lock before throwing it open and plunging into the darkness of the night. As an avid outdoorsman, I knew the woods like the back of my hand. I could find my way back to the van even blind. But as I sprinted through the trees, one thought consumed me. Could I outrun this thing? I didn't have time to dwell on the thought. The sound of its heavy footsteps crashing through the woods shattered the silence, growing louder, closer. It was coming for me. I pushed myself to run faster than I ever thought possible, my lungs burning, my legs screaming with each stride. But it wasn't enough. I could feel it closing in, the ground trembling beneath its weight as it gained on me. Just as it seemed I'd be caught, I spotted a ditch up ahead. Without hesitation, I dove into it, hitting the cold earth hard. My chest heaved as I pressed myself against the dirt, heart hammering in my ears. I could only pray it wouldn't notice and would keep charging past. To my shock, it charged right past me, its massive form disappearing into the darkness ahead. I stayed frozen in the ditch, barely breathing, every second dragging on like an eternity. When I finally dared to move, I bolted. The van wasn't far, 5 minutes at most, but I ran faster than I ever had in my life, fueled by sheer terror. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the keys, desperately trying to unlock the door. The moment I got inside, I slammed it shut and stomped on the gas. Relief washed over me for a split second, until I glanced in the rearview mirror. My heart plummeted. The beast was still there, its monstrous form tearing through the trees, determined to catch me. Eventually, I made it to the main road. My chest heaved, and my knuckles turned white against the steering wheel as I sped away. In the rearview mirror, I saw the beast linger at the tree line, its black eyes fixed on me, until the forest swallowed it whole. That was years ago, and I've never gone back. I told my friend what happened at the cabin. I told him everything, warning him to stay far away, but he didn't believe me. Last year, he drove up there to make some repairs. He never came back. Search teams said he must have gotten lost in the woods, but I know better. I know what got him. It was that damned beast of the woods. So, to the beast that haunts those woods, I have one request. Let's never meet again.